I remember like the refrain from me, like the honest, like lamentation was, God, is this really the way we want to spend me? I just felt like, really? You know, like, come on, like there's gotta, like, surely there's a better story that we would go and live together.
Today on the theFormed.life podcast, we are most excited to introduce you to one of our longtime favorite friends and a person who lives their life in a most beautiful way of Jesus. I'm Bill Gorman, campus pastor at the Brookside campus.
And I'm Paul Brandis, campus pastor at the Shawnee campus. And today's guest is Jeanette Thomas, or as she's better known, JT. Both Bill and I have been friends with JT for many, many years, and she was someone that we were so eager to bring on as a guest to the podcast.
That's right. JT has lived a fascinating life with vocations as a pastor, a nonprofit leader, and now as an entrepreneur running her own startup coaching and brand story management business.
And on top of all of that, JT has recently been navigating a difficult journey with cancer. All of that and more make up JT's wonderful life, and it is a life that has been beautifully formed in the way of Jesus. And we can't wait to show you how through this conversation. So let's dive in together.
JT, it's so good to have you with us today.
It's so good to be here.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for making the time and being part of this with us
seriously.
today. Yeah. Well, you know, and JT, you and I have known each other for a long time. I was thinking about this today. It's over 20 years because I first came to Christ Community in 2001 as a freshman in college. And I think you were maybe on staff as like a youth.
I just remembered the moment I met you.
Oh my gosh.
No, you do. I don't know if I remember. Tell me.
If I'm not mistaken, Tom, Kevin Harlan, John Rich, JT, Nathan, walking into Starbucks that doesn't longer exist any longer.
Yeah.
Or
Over
Maybe
on
it
State
does.
Line. Or,
Yeah, but I think it was the State Line.
Mm-hmm.
It was definitely a coffee shop. And at the time you were ghostwriting for
Oh my gosh. I've heard this story.
so-and-so.
Yeah, that's right.
Should not,
we won't name. Yeah.
Who must not be named.
Yeah.
It wasn't Voldemort, though.
who shall not be named.
Yeah.
And we thought you were so sharp. Actually, I didn't know if you were. I didn't know, but
JT had her doubts.
I didn't have my doubts, but I just didn't know you. I didn't have any track record there. But some of the guys had known you because you'd been attending at least part time on Sunday mornings, and they had met you at church, I believe.
Yeah.
Or
I did razors.
And so then we sort of had this. We were walking in, you were walking out, I believe.
Okay.
And we had this exchange at the threshold moment. And then we had the conversation after the conversation, like, oh, that's Bill, and blah, blah, blah. And it's fun to think about it because I do not remember, but I wonder if we might have planted a seed around stepping into an application for the pastoral residency program. I don't know.
Maybe all the way back then, yeah. Because that's one of the things that the three of us share is that we were all pastoral residents at Christ Community. Jeanette, you were one of the very first, along with Nathan Miller, kind of pioneered that for the rest of us. So thank you.
Yes, truly.
In that. Yeah. And then, you and I went to Kenya together with teams a couple times. Yeah. So we did the international travel thing together. And then
we killed a day in London, like some crazy flight delay.
Yeah, we had like a layover. It was like 8 hours. And we're like, let's go see this city for a few hours. Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And then you spent pretty extended time on Christ Community staff and then went on to work for Hope International, doing some really cool like microfinance and community development work globally. And then at a certain point, you said, okay, I think I want to start my own thing. And I want to do it around coaching, not athletic coaching, not physical training, but like kind of professional development. I would love to know, like, what started stirring in you? What was happening that made you think, I think I can do this work. I want to do this work. Just tell me a little bit of that story.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to hear you talk about it by sort of like reflecting on the chapter headings. Because I think you're exactly right. That's sort of like, these are the places I was. And sometimes when I look at my own vocational story on paper, I can get a little whiplash. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Like it's a bit of a rodeo. It seems, especially because the work I did at Hope was a little less on the frontline ministry side and was more in the philanthropic,
That's right.
like
That's right.
fundraising
Donor
and
development.
exactly, yeah. And so it's because there's like some question marks, maybe a little bit about are there through lines?
Yeah, right.
And if there are, what are they?
Are you asking us?
Can you help me with this? But so what I would say is that absolutely there are, and I don't need your help with those. I might have needed a coach's help from time to time.
There you go.
Well, it's actually probably a good
I know.
segue to say that
totally.
I
Exactly.
think that so many of us end up offering to others what we first needed to discover ourselves.
That's
In our lives. And I think that there was some sense in which I knew that I had leadership gifts. I had gifts of innovation. I'm a bit of a pioneer. So even when we look at even my work at Christ Community,
100%.
sort of in every role I had, I was kind of being hired to develop something or restart something, So, I think that was a kind of scaffolding and backdrop that set the table and provided kind of a broader context for me to think about coaching. But I really came to coaching like a baker at the table. And sometimes when I'm on an airplane, and, people ask you what you do, and it sort of depends on who you're talking to, how you want to say that. And God love you. I remember the day when I had to field the pastoral title.
Right.
It's like you decide, how am I going to say that? Just because sometimes people just can't even hear you after you use the P word.
Yep.
So, and I think in a way, like life coach is a little similar, or leader. I actually usually talk about leadership coaching because that's
like that.
more what I do. And there is kind of a distinction in the coaching world there. But I rarely lead with the language of even leadership coaching because I think it's a little jazz handsy, like woo woo, for a lot of people. But sometimes what I will say is I love the work that I do. How you find yourself in moments where you have all of the answers and you're still stuck. Like your kitchen sink is dripping and you have watched 3 YouTube tutorials. You've called your brother-in-law. You're headlong into the nuts and the wrenches and the parts and you can't get the thing to stop dripping. Like, all the answers, right?
Yeah.
And often it's because there's something that's a little more complicated in the broader context, or there's something that's a little more at the heart of the challenge. You're engaging it maybe with technical answers and solutions, but the work at hand perhaps is a little bit more adaptive. Maybe it's not quite as straightforward, but it's asking for a little more curiosity. It's asking for a little more experimentation. And it's inviting you to step in a little more curious around the anatomy of what's going on here. And I would say, and I think this ties to gifts of leadership and innovation. I think any leader, any innovator needs to come at the work and certainly at the people dynamics from a place of curiosity and from a place of maybe asking the second or third question, right? And so I think I did that a lot in my leadership. I think also, and I would say that I owe a lot of the second lesson I'm about to talk about, I think I owe a lot of it to my time at Christ Community, which was a bit of a shift that I think in my youngest years as a leader, I thought I could think my way through it, or I thought it was about finding the right answer, And increasingly, I realized that, you can't be a schlep. Like, you need to maybe read some books, and maybe there is at times some technical knowledge you need to be able to learn more about. You need to grow in your competencies. But increasingly, I began to realize that, the genius isn't in the room. The genius is the room, and what is it to begin to set a table for the kind of cultivation of gifts that are in whatever room it is. And if it's a one-on-one conversation or if it's a broader team of people, and certainly in the context of community development work, and specifically the kind of asset-based community development work that I did. So where you step into a space of vulnerability, but you start not with what do you need, but like, what do you have? Like, what are the bright spots?
What's right here?
What's right here? Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, that's one of those spaces where it encourages the people who are closest to the problem or the opportunity to engage, right? Like I still believe that's sort of the best way to go about. What I'm not saying is that there aren't ever places for hierarchical leadership or broader institutional structures, of course.
Yeah.
You know, but I think over time I started understanding that the real game, the kinds of things that I was really interested in, usually pretty early stage work or pretty messy problems or complicated opportunities. Let me sink my teeth into it. You know, that kind of space is better served with this kind of relentless curiosity. And I started to realize that there was an art and a science to it.
Yeah.
And again, I came to that first from a place of being pretty stuck in my own storylines, vocationally and relationally, maybe even circumstantially. And in God's grace, I had the gift of some really powerful coaching that absolutely reframed paradigms for me and invited me into a deeper and a more holistic engagement with a lot of things that I hadn't thought to question before.
Yeah.
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 So I'm curious. So then how did that, what about that experience triggered for you? Like, I actually want to do this with other people, or I want to learn this craft of, and maybe even just say, well, you've made this distinction kind of between life coach, leadership coaching. You are storyboard coach, is your kind of your metaphor, which I love. But even just like describe, like when you're like doing like your best work, what you love to do as a coach, like what does that look like?
Yeah. I mean, I would say I'm definitely still in my early phase of my own business. And I don't know that we've talked about it, but I've launched another partnership business as well.
Okay.
That's about the marriage of brand messaging and coaching. We can talk about that later if we want to, or not, you know. But I would just want to be sort of confessional to say, I actually don't know. I'm still kind of playing at it and inviting the niche to define me a little bit is part of staying curious, right?
Yeah.
But that said, I think like the name Storyboard Coaching for me came. Well, I don't know if it came easily, but the minute that idea came to me, I knew it was the right one because I've always loved the way that storyboards accentuate all that happens, interestingly, between the frames, right? Like all the action in a comic strip happens between the frames. And I think maybe even as someone who has lived a more unconventional life, didn't marry at 27 and then have 2.5 kids and a dog, you know what I mean? I think I identified a little bit with the negative space in terms of, I mean, as a metaphor, and didn't know a lot of people like me who were occupying that space in ways that I found compelling and beautiful. And even when I think about as a female in pastoral leadership, you know, there's at times there weren't a lot of people that had my gift profile and were in sort of the spaces and contexts where I was. And so that's a long way around of saying that I got really curious about how to find my way inside of these messy middle places. You know, and so storyboard, and one of the things I love to do, I mean, my tagline for my own leadership coaching business is helping you get from here to there, you know? And a lot of times, like, if capable, creative people are stuck here and they're having trouble getting to there, the answer is not to double down with all that you know. Right? Usually, I mean, it's hard to read the label from inside the jar, you know? And so I love to get to be someone who comes alongside and helps to provide a context where there's shame-free honesty. And a lot of times we're checking out our own storylines. We don't even know we're telling ourselves a script or an identity or whatever it might be. And but we're not liberated until we can name those and then rewrite the script.
Yeah.
So.
But I think, one of the through lines, even from kind of what you're saying, your time at Christ Community, then your time in the nonprofit world at Hope, to now this entrepreneurial, innovative, this launch of Storyboard, I was really struck your, those that are closest to the facts, those that have the opportunity to sort of speak into where they're at, but like even how that in asset-based development work at Hope is a bit of what I know you're bringing to your clients on the coaching side as well, and inviting them to sort of define some of that. And then the third or fourth question down is going to unlock something, or I just am really interested in that kind of connected through line from, again, both Christ Community, Hope, and then now into the coaching space as well.
Yeah. There's a formal leadership arena called adaptive leadership.
Yeah.
And I've already used that distinction in this conversation already, so it wouldn't hurt maybe to even define it. That technical leadership is stepping into problems, challenges, opportunities that have a pretty straightforward pathway. It's like not everything has to be complicated. In fact, 90% of our lives is kind of repeatable. Even a heart surgeon does very complicated technical work when he goes into the surgical theater, as they say. I think that's what they call it, right? But the minute you run into trouble or you've got a surprise, you better get a little bit adaptive about it. And adaptive leadership, the way they define it in the literature, is mobilizing people to tackle challenges without known or easy answers. And so when you think about that, there's kind of two elements there. One is that I'm not going to just assert myself and come in and do it for you, ask all these questions. I'm mobilizing. I'm setting a table and providing a little safety where you get to get curious. And you get to try some things out and get on the ground and experiment a little bit. But then, you measure it by progress in the work, right? So part of it is learning to fail quickly. and part of it's being able and willing. And I think, gosh, I don't know if you guys will resonate with this or not, but some of my biggest leadership lessons have had to do with getting comfortable being around others' discomfort.
Yeah.
Yes.
And because it is hard to not rush in and make that right.
Yeah.
But man, I have a coach. I say I have a coach. I'm in a leadership cohort, like a learning cohort with a coach who only coaches in this cohort space. He's on like Canadian Coach of the Year. Michael Bungay-Stanier is his name. And he talks about how, part of the reason why you give a little check on your advice monster is because
So,
it's coming.
I've heard that from you before.
And we are in a culture that rewards us at every turn for having the right answer, right? Or for being the one who can fix it, but he talks about 3 reasons why you don't just jump immediately to advice. The first is that you're probably solving the wrong problem. Yeah. If someone has come to you with something and they're capable, creative, whatever, they're probably trying to solve it at this level, and you need to go 5 layers down, to get to the heart of the thing. Or you need to deal with some of the people dynamics or whatever it might be, The second reason is that your advice isn't as good as you think it is. Right. The fact is your counterpart knows more than they can even articulate.
Right.
And this is true in pastoral care.
Yeah.
Right? Your counterpart knows more than they can even articulate about all the things that are going on. So that's part of the value of staying curious. And then even if you're just genius and you are able to isolate the right problem, and you have got gold dust to offer, still, it may not be the right leadership move, because the way we grow is when we own a problem or an opportunity or a risk, and we build the muscles to engage again there, you know? So yeah, I mean, you can see that's the sort of, I mean, who wouldn't want to do that work, right?
Say the adaptive leadership definition one more time.
Yeah. So, and look, I mean, this I'm basically
sure.
there's
Jeanette's
there's a guy named Ron Heifetz and who talks about it, and then I've done some training with a group called Adaptive Change Advisors.
Yes.
And the way we defined it was mobilizing people to tackle challenges or engage in opportunities without known or easy answers, measured by progress in the work.
Yeah. And so what I love about that too is because I love sports. And so the coach metaphor, like that definition of adaptive leadership, to me, as I think about virtually every sport that has that is known to man and has a coach, that's what they're doing.
Oh my goodness!
I mean that is what they're doing.
There's a reason I love athletics. Right. You know, I'm so excited for football season.
Right. I mean, but that is what they're doing, and even I mean, it's just like even like you think about a soccer coach that really does all of that on the front end, and then during the course of the game, except for halftime, it's all about what the players are doing on the field. Yeah, it's just fascinating. It connects so well across sort of where we're drawing even that metaphor into other leadership spaces or getting to connect there. So I love that. That's amazing.
Yeah. So JT, you are in the midst of this amazing coaching thing. You're getting it started, and then you go to the doctor one day.
Yes, I did.
And you know, a few appointments later, I don't know exactly the timeline, but you hear the words that no one wants to hear, and that it's cancer.
Yeah.
And you've just started your own thing.
I was I think I was 14 months in. So I'd had one solid year.
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, I stepped into the launch of my business from a nonprofit leadership background. So it's not like I had like a huge stockpile
of capital. Just like,
So I mean, my runway was short anyways, you know, and I had a great first year, and you know what happens after a great first year is you need a great second year.
And then you have this like massive health challenge.
Yeah.
I'm just really like what were the things that went through your mind and heart when you're like, God, like what, like how are we here? And then how have you experienced God in the midst of this, either his presence or his absence?
I love that question.
In these last 18 plus months of this? That's a big question, but wherever you want to take it.
You know, I think as I recall, there were two primary refrains that surfaced for me when I first heard cancer. One had to do with so much intentionality that I had around my health.
Yes.
And, you know, I have a strong history of cancer in my family, and I never believed that you could control, whether or not you got a diagnosis. But I also, and to this day, believe that like epigenetics are a thing, and like nobody like wakes up one day with cancer. Like there's a whole cancer involves both the weeds of like tumor growth, but there's a soil that those grow inside of too, right? So I'd for years had been working on and just being intentional.
On your soil.
Yeah, and I mean,
proactive.
I mean, I was like, Lord, what is it? Just the simple idea of stewardship, right? Like, let me, a lot of people neglect it, but like, let me make the hard choice to like, and not, I mean, I guess maybe there was some pride wrapped up in it too. I'm like, as I look back, I don't think there was a lot, but there was certainly intentionality to say, not everyone maybe is as intentional with like, all different kinds of testing and just nutrition and fitness and all that, so there was a part of me that just was like super bummed and surprised, just like a head scratcher around how much bad math is out there in the world,
What do you mean by that, by bad math?
Yeah. I mean, just that in any given moment, a circumstance can go sideways that is inexplicable.
Yeah,
you
2
know?
plus 2 is supposed to equal 4, but now somewhere we're at 8.
Yeah, I mean, I think, do you guys feel this way? The older I get, the more I'm just forced to grow my own capacity, not only for discomfort, but also to hold on to a lot of mysteries and tensions.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think,
Without a doubt.
and I guess in a way I got found out that I sort of had probably told myself a storyline that my intentionality meant that I had a measure of control when I didn't. You know, probably that's part of it.
Sure.
You know, is that I was probably hanging on a little bit to some idolatry there. You know, if I can say it that way. So I think there was a way in which I felt betrayed by my diligence and my circumstances, and sort of on the receiving end of a middle finger from the universe, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's one part of it.
Yeah.
And then I think there was another part of me, and it's probably maybe just the flip side of that same coin, that I remember having heartfelt prayers to God because I knew pretty quickly, though my prognosis was good from the start. The good news about my cancer diagnosis is that we caught things early on.
In part because of your intentionality and proactivity.
That's right.
I mean,
absolutely.
but still.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So there are gifts in being proactive and intentional. Absolutely. But the pathology of the cancer that I had, was my diagnosis, was just a very aggressive cancer. And in the end, I mean, you see my party hat. I couldn't help but bring the mask on in today. So I don't know, maybe just like to enjoy it for the moment. But no, so the fact is I learned pretty quickly that I was going to have a really intensive run with chemotherapy. That, you know, the team, while it was early stage, just they needed to throw the books at it.
Wow.
And in the end, I mean, yesterday wrapped about 18 months of chemo. I had one little break for surgery in there. Yeah. So all to say, when I started seeing on the front end how extensive the chemo journey was going to be, and especially in light of the early stage entrepreneurship, and even just, I guess I've mentioned already, you know, the vulnerability of being a single person in a household, you know. I remembered
in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, lots of vulnerabilities there. That's right. Yeah, financially, physically, emotionally, relationally.
How do I go to appointments?
There's a million,
logistically.
There's a million different types of vulnerability. Yeah. And so I remember like the refrain from me, like the honest, like lamentation was, God, is this really the way we want to spend me? I just felt like, really? You know, like, come on. Like, there's gotta, like, surely there's a better story that we would go and live together. Surely now I look back on that, and because you asked, I mean, just to follow up, Bill, with the fullness of your question, which is, how did I experience God's presence or his absence? And I have to say that I have had such a keen sense of not only God's presence, but the presence of his people
I was going to ask
around
that too.
me. Yeah. And so,
which is often how we experience him, right?
So true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I wish it were not so in many ways.
Sure.
Right. But yeah, there's something about the hard pressed places, you know, that can set the table in a really unique way. I mean, Paul talks about it, what it is to know the fellowship of Christ in suffering.
Yes.
And then you think about the way I was reflecting on it actually this morning, as I was circling back to a small community that's been around me step by step. And I was reflecting that I knew God was inviting me to be a little bit more fully known and seen and known. in some different ways. Like God had been speaking to my heart about that prior to the diagnosis. And then when this landed and I stepped into this journey, I guess all along the way, I've been so aware that it would be hard to be more fully seen and known in a way, cancer just kind of pushed me into that at every turn.
Wow.
For example, I know a number of women who get a cancer diagnosis and make a choice, a really respectable choice, to stay a little quieter about that, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's a lot to manage the minute you go above ground with that.
Yeah.
You're not only managing your own self, but you're needing to sort of be on the receiving end of all the storylines there and the questions and the concern, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of times you need to project manage your own health and you're the one with the least bandwidth, least amount of bandwidth. So, but in my case, I just knew I didn't have a choice but to go sort of big and bold and needy out the door. And so I look back on that as a real grace because it has been one of the most remarkable experiences of my life. I've been calling it the spiritual act of receiving.
I love that language.
It's not something that comes naturally for me.
Yeah.
And so it's been, I've learned a lot in those spaces. Yeah.
Are there moments you talk about just that community of people? Is there a moment or two or a story that you think of when it's like, I don't know, I don't know what I was going to do, or I was at the end of my rope, or just it was a normal, whatever a normal Tuesday is when you have cancer, but and someone showed up in a big, like, what are some tangible, and I mean, there's dozens and dozens of these shows, I have no doubt, but are there any ones that just like, I'll always remember this person or this thing that happened with this group of people and how they served me, or
it's kind of like asking me to talk about my favorite child.
But when you got to practice that receiving, that the spiritual receiving.
Let me share a few quick thoughts there, but then one through line.
Okay.
So I joke, there's a couple people who stepped in and we called them my magical elixir handlers. So I had terrible GI issues. I mean, I had a 4 chemo cocktail the first 8 months. And I mean, I would just be down for 2 weeks. I'm talking, it leveled me so much. We ended up adjusting my dosage.
Wow.
But I'm talking I couldn't leave the bed. You know what I mean? And so it's just so I've always been a capable, let me go, even if I'm sick, I'll get up and microwave the chicken noodle soup. You know what I mean? And so it was just the weirdest thing to be so dependent. But these 2 different women learned, because I had written I'd found some ginger shot, like a shot of ginger, somebody juiced it. It's like a green. It's very potent.
Yeah. I think I was at your house one day and you let me try some of that.
Maybe
actually,
I did. I thought that's hilarious. I mean, there was a time when I was probably hosting people with ginger elixirs. What can I say? It was tasty good. And so what was so cool about them is, and I think the reason I mention it is that I saw the way that different people saw me. They listened, their ear caught just a little something oh, that was good for her tummy. And then, within the 24 hours, a text, JT, I saw about this ginger thing. Can I ship you a case? It's that kind of thing. Or I'm going to bring this by. And there were actually 2 different ones. One was sweeter and I used it at certain times, and one had no sugar and I used it at certain times, and they and these women just showed up and did that. Of their own accord, because they had tuned into me, right?
They listened.
Exactly. It's kind of back to what we're saying. They asked the second question, and I think my journey is so full of that. People who, and this is maybe the through line that I was going to mention, is that more than what people brought. I mean, that was a real provision, and there were so many of them. I could never name them all. I mean, taxis to appointments. And I'm going to call this a need. a teddy bear mascot in my
bring
bed.
up the teddy bear. I was going to mention it.
Bartholomew.
It struck me.
And Bear Me Too, but Bartholomew was the littler one that was a little more front and center.
In the journey.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And he, it's like who knew? I wasn't gonna, that was the case when I didn't think to name that I needed a teddy bear. But someone thought, you know what? That could be a little proxy for us. It was a family that gave it to me for us. Actually, it was my business partner and his family gave it to me. And it could be a little proxy for us in those hard moments at 2 a.m., you know?
Yeah.
And so, but the point is that I think what I was so interested about, really, it became, for sure, initially I experienced it as a grace, but increasingly, I started realizing this is actually just a lesson. Like, in addition to grace, this is a lesson for me, a master class in the power of place sharing. Because, and Bill, I remember your visit to me and the vulnerability of actually stepping into hard places without anything, right? With only attunement, with only presence. That's the whole enchilada, my friends. I mean, that's actually what remakes and actually sort of honors deeply these places of pain and suffering, is a capacity, again, you have to be really okay with yourself to step into places. And you guys have been at these pastoral care situations at a bedside or like in those vulnerable moments, it's not about a ginger elixir or a teddy bear.
Yeah.
It's about the presence of a person who comes into that place.
Yeah.
And their presence alongside you makes that hardship bearable. And that's what happened for me again and again and again.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that reflection. And I do think, as I've journeyed in pastoral ministry and even in some of the chaplaincy work, it's kind of back to the coaching thing we're talking about. Yeah. You want to come with the answer. You want to come and be able to say the thing that's going to make it okay, do the thing. And it's a ministry of presence. It's being with and having to be okay with that being enough. And
I think too, it's being willing to step into some awkward spaces there.
Sure.
And even some straightforward questions. Hey, I'd love to stick around if you have some energy for it. If it's better just for a quick hug and a ginger drop off, then let's go that way. You know what I mean? And that's my friend Erin Davig. Some of you might know her.
Oh, yes.
She was a former Brookside member,
yes.
and she introduced me in a little community that she pals around with to this day. They talk about the gift of a freedom-rich environment, the FRE. And it's basically this simple idea of an invitation to freely ask, freely offer, freely say no. And back to the coaching world, we talk about in the coaching spaces, like the idea of staying out of drama and kind of a drama triangle where people are stepping into roles like rescuer or persecutor or victim, And one way that you do that is you adult well. And what that means is that you are willing to ask for what you want or need, knowing the answer might be no, right? And that's actually brave work.
Yes.
It's a lot easier to passively aggressively queue for what I want or need, or to work around sideways and. So I think once again, we're back sort of into the heart of vulnerability. And actually, all of the coaching skills that I've learned in stepping alongside clients have been so helpful for me, too, in staying curious with myself and with my team and all that. So.
Yeah,
it's really good.
Well, JT, as you think about kind of who our primary audience is, mostly the beautiful people of Christ community, and the idea of this podcast is Jesus showing up in every facet of our Monday lives, which of course is work and we've
Health.
Health, exactly. Right. I mean, kind of everything you've been sharing here, and it's already been so many takeaways and practical potential next steps for our people. But as you think about kind of the story you've lived, and I'm really struck by your comment, God is the lamentation. God, is this how we want to spend me? That's really, I'm going to be reflecting on that and just, but as you think about our people and what we've been able to talk about, what sort of like things might you be encouraging people to consider or for their own lives and their own places? And I've heard you, as you've walked through this, particularly your health journey, both the challenge and opportunity to stay curious in the middle of that. How would you be encouraging our listeners?
I mean, you know what comes immediately to mind, Paul, is that, and my answer has changed so much over the years,
Sure.
I think.
Yeah, wow.
But I have just come to understand how central it is to be personally and consciously aware of God's love for me and his delight in me.
Yes.
And I was at a conference, I don't know, 6 months ago, and I heard just a little simple kind of, it's a trifold prayer movement. And the first movement is the simple phrase, God, I'm aware that you are aware of me.
Yes.
God, I'm aware that you are aware, lovingly aware of me, right? And so that's, I mean, you think of that's the old Hebrew blessing. God make his countenance to shine upon you, right?
Yeah.
But to understand, like, what is that? To be on the receiving end of that kind of loving, I delight in you gaze, right? Mm-hmm. And then the second movement is, God, something important to me is wherever that moment finds me, something important to me is. And let's just keep it honest, right? Like, God already knows that. Yeah. So let's just go ahead and say the plain true thing.
Yeah.
And if we need to fight with him about it, let's just go do it. Let's just name it, you know? And then the third one is back to the question, back to the curiosity. God, what's something important to you? And just to pause there, just to pause. And so often it's funny how God will almost direct me back to that number one, like just a word of affirmation, a word of love, a word of encouragement, you know? I mean, I have to fight pretty hard to stay in that place. And when I say fight, you know, I mean, that's funny because that might sound like it's at odds with grace. That's not what I mean. But I guess I just mean my bent, my flesh, gosh, the headlines and the press of any working world is not flowing in that direction. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I guess that's what comes to mind.
Incredible. Yeah. I love that.
In recent years, Zephaniah 3:17 has become really dear to me.
I thought of it when she was talking.
Which is that, where it's just, it's God speaking through the prophet Zephaniah about the people of Israel.
Such an interesting contrast because the book of Zephaniah.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
Right.
Earlier on in the book, you wouldn't necessarily expect, but this is where it's going for people who don't just have Zephaniah 3:17 memorized. It is the end of a book that has a lot of really sobering truth about how Israel has turned away from God and how they're going to go into exile as a result of that. But where it ends is with, I'm going to bring you back, and I rejoice over you with singing. Mm-hmm. I delight in you.
The Lord your God is with you. He is mighty to save.
Yeah.
Yeah. He delights over you with singing.
I mean, just this picture of God singing over us.
If I can just draw maybe one connection here to what you're saying, and then this lived journey of what it has been to walk in that beloved pathway over the past year. One of the missing pieces for me that became so clear is how impossible it is to know that kind of love and delight from God apart from God's people.
Yeah.
Now, it's not to say God can't find you in a private moment, you know, but the fact is, there are wounds that we carry, and they're just not going to get rewired. I mean, I've done a lot of neuroscience work too in my coaching, my studies and my practice. And look, we're just not going to get healed without belonging in love.
Healthy attachment. And,
I mean, all the
Yes,
things.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Well, and this is what Jesus is doing. He's building his church, which is a community where you can belong in that kind of way. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like almost like he designed it and made it for us, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but it's like you come back to it is so simple, but it's incredible when you do the work of thinking through this. It's like how incredibly profound and beautiful that he's made us in his image for relationship with him and also with one another, and this community that is the local church. I mean, the global universal church, but that it only is real to the extent that we're actually living it out.
That's right.
Yeah.
Knowledge and truth is never just theoretical. It's not the thing you answer on the test. That said, I am sensitive the fallout of this cultural moment and the shadow sides of how much hurt and betrayal have been lived in the world. And so,
especially around the church.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Especially. Yeah. And so, and perhaps not surprising that the one place you'd think that it would be okay to receive the love and the belonging, that's a place where you're going to get surprised when it breaks down. But I think now we're back to that honest posture that allows for the both and, that we still live on this side of the new day, and it's okay to name it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, JT, for the grace of your generosity throughout, just kind of doing a bit of walking with, and certainly being tuned in to some of your updates health-wise. I have one of the phrases that I've thought through or experienced even is just the multiplication of grace. So I was saying to Bill before you even got here, I don't know that I've ever told you this, but your writing has always been a gift to me. Even back when I was just reading your emails about Extension Ministries updates, your writing has always, and Bill pointed out, both you and I have a love for the context and the story around the story and the story around that story. And just the way you embody that in the written word, I've always admired and found beautiful. And you wrote, regular and semi-regular updates about the graces you were receiving. And they were multiplied as grace in my life. And that's, I think, part of God's story that he's writing even in, and maybe especially in hard places. And your generosity today to be here and to tell your story, it just means a lot to us. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's an honor.
Yeah. Well, and Paul and I think you have a book in you. So anyway,
we'll see.
I don't know. We'll see.
I would read
this coaching and branding agency off the ground.
Well, next
know what? In seriousness, I don't know if you've seen, I am writing on Substack a little bit.
Yes, I have seen. Yeah, of course. I am definitely subscribed.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We can link to that in the show
we will.
notes.
Yeah, we absolutely will. Yeah.
That was not meant as an advertisement, but it was meant to say, but it's just that I love the chance to be intentional with that too.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Okay, well, before we wrap this up, we always ask our guests this on the podcast, just as a sort of like get to know you. And in a lot of sense, Paul and I actually know you pretty well. Sometimes we don't know our guests very well. But we're still going to ask you this question because I don't know the answer. Yes. And that is, if you could, you've done some amazing different careers, but like if you were just like got a chance to just live another life and choose another career path, and I don't know, what would JT do? And you said earlier, maybe you've got like 10, but give us a few, like the thing, like what would you do?
The one that comes kind of quickly to mind, and it's probably adjacent, meaning I might find a way to build this out yet.
Yeah. Never say never.
But that's right. But there is something so powerful for me about what happens when we step into God's creation with space and embodiment. And I have an annual girls hiking trip tradition. And we have, and actually my cousin has been, he's a brilliant expert hiker. Like he's done the Wonderland Trail that
around
hikes the
Rainier.
perimeter of Rainier,
Yeah.
like by himself. You know
Wow.
what I mean? He
like
won a
80 miles
lottery.
or something.
I think he trained to do it in 12 days, and you have to apply for a lottery to get it. I think he got like an 8-day thing. He was like, well, that's good enough.
Hike a little faster.
He did.
Wow.
So anyway,
Wow.
so we dream about operating a little sort of like coaching, hiking outpost space where basically it's kind of it's a pilgrimage idea, you know? And I mean, that's maybe too, again, that could yet happen. So I hope maybe that's too close. I could share other ideas too, but
give me one more. That's not
man.
even adjacent. Just like totally other.
Okay. I love international travel. And so it's funny, I guess all of mine are kind of, they're orbiting around, aren't they? Around like getting people into different, basically dislocated, right? In different places. But I love the idea of, this requires a little backstory because of my time in philanthropy. Mm-hmm. I just know the value of finding creative ways to help centers of resource, power, money, education, to help all of that get more connected with the lived experience and, again, like the people closest to the challenge or the problem, right? And so anytime I can flip the script a little bit, you know, and sort of center the expertise of men and women and communities inside of places where, you know, maybe you don't think of them as, and they're not given the resources often to lead the way, right? So, I mean, something like the African TEDx.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Something along those lines where we're just getting really creative about how to showcase these voices that have such wisdom. They may not have education, but I'm telling you what, they have wisdom, you know, and they are the ones we need to hear from much more than we do. And so that's another one to me. Again, this is all probably a little bit adjacent to what I'm already doing. But
It's great. It's great.
So
I love
good.
it.
So good. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, totally.
And thanks again for being here. And we will put some links in the show notes and really just appreciate you going on this journey with us and JT, one of our favorite people. So thanks so much.
Thank you.